welcome back to our beginner herbalism series of classes. I apologize for the sort of anime villain highlight on my glasses. Unfortunately, I have a pretty severe migraine today, and so must be in a very dark room. And that means that the brightest light is my computer screen, so I have access to my notes, which causes this sort of anime villain thing that's going on. Anyway. Today we are talking about the ethics of herbalism, which is a complex topic, especially as if you are in the United States, there isn't always a regulatory body that is enforcing any kind of ethical standard for herbalists or those who practice any kind of herbalism, natural medicine, or herbology. I'm not going to get into whether or not there should be regulatory bodies, licensing bodies, how accreditation works for herbalism schools in the United States. It isn't particularly relevant to what I'm going to be discussing. I will say that unlike some of the other classes I teach where I'm sort of the opinion that you should make up your own damn mind, I do actually think that there's a standard that herbalists should, how do I put this? Be held to. A standard that herbalists should be held to, or else they shouldn't be practicing for others. I don't have any power to enforce that, unfortunately, which has led to me having several frustrating interactions with other herbalists. But I do think that there should be one. So we're going to get into that, and I'll try to keep it brief. Now, because I am endeavoring to keep it brief, I do want to address the fact that there is no way I can cover every ethical quandary that an herbalist will encounter during the course of their professional career. There will always be occasions where you are going to have to sort out your ethical boundaries for yourself. This is a rough set of guidelines and is in no way comprehensive. Sorry, there really just isn't a way to get into absolutely everything that an herbalist is ever going to have to sit down and decide for their practice and for their clients. It is what it is. All right, so to start with, I will say that the primary obligation I feel that an herbalist has is to be well and thoroughly educated on the topic of herbalism. We are first and foremost students, and we should always be learning. We're never done. One of the things I despise about herbalism in the United States is how many programs are out there saying that if you pay them a certain amount of money in 3 weeks or 6 weeks, after you buy their course, after you buy their books, after you attend their seminar, you will be able to be a practicing herbalist. I think that in order to be a practicing herbalist, you should be putting in 4 to 6 years of intensive training. And I think that after that, you should consider yourself under the obligation to have continuing education, to continue learning as new information comes out, as we gain a more thorough understanding of the pharmacology of herbs, of their effects on the systems of the body. I don't think you're ever done learning, and I think that you should be keeping very thorough records of what you have learned through your own practice as well, and be amending those as you encounter new information. So that is the very first ethical obligation that I feel an herbalist has. Secondly, I think it is an herbalist's obligation to understand that just because something is natural doesn't make it safe. A significant number of people hold the mistaken assumption that all herbal products are safe because they are natural. But herbal medicines have pharmacological effects, just like any kind of synthetic pharmaceutical has pharmacological effects. Plants can be potent, they can be toxic, they can be poisonous. And unfortunately, there is typically far less information available as to the safe use of herbal products than there is in the safe use of conventional synthetic pharmaceutical medications. Some herbal medicines have been associated with really severe issues of overdose, toxicity, drug and herb interactions, allergic reactions, contamination with other products. These dangers that herbal medicines present, it requires the oversight of a well-informed and experienced herbalist who is willing to recognize that just because something grows on its own doesn't mean that it's safe. Now, the example that we always like to use is belladonna. Belladonna is a completely naturally occurring plant. It is not a synthetic drug. The berries of belladonna are naturally occurring, and they're still deadly. But then you have these herbalists who go, oh, well, I just won't walk the poison path. Rosemary's deadly in sufficient doses. Rosemary's an abortifacient in sufficient doses. Licorice root causes hypertension. Their assumption that, if they just avoid the poison path, then they won't have to worry about things being potentially poisonous or toxic, is inaccurate. And we need to be constantly, to return to the first point about education, updating ourselves as to what is poisonous, what is toxic, because we're learning new information about that every day. Just in my lifetime, how dangerous comfrey can be has been more thoroughly understood, and now comfrey is more thoroughly regulated. I think it is the obligation of herbalists to know herbal history. Many herbal medicines have been in use for incredibly substantial periods of time, perhaps even hundreds or thousands of years, before they were subjected to any kind of clinical studies, if they've been subjected to clinical studies at all. It is reasonable to conclude that there is an extensive history of herbal medicines over long periods of historical duration that can reveal implications of their safety, how much to take, what the potential side effects are, and that this comes from something many synthetic drugs don't have, which is hundreds of years of documented use in a population, recorded use of the effects on the population, and therefore an understanding passed down through generations as to how to safely make use of an herbal medicine. However, when those herbal medicines are removed from context, when we are not aware of the herbal history, when we're not aware of the cultural and traditional roots, when things are being used in a completely different environment, under different conditions, in different formats, with no context, with no history, the consequences of their use can be unpredictable because we've removed them from the predictive model. An herbal medicine can sometimes have thousands of years of documented use in a culture and then be picked up by another culture as a fad in the naturopathic movement, in the herbal medicine movement, and used without paying any attention to all of that extensive research that's available. I've noticed this in particular when Western herbalists pick up something out of Ayurvedic medicine or traditional Chinese medicine or the medicine traditions of South America, that they'll become very suddenly and completely obsessed with an herb but not obsessed enough to really research its historical use and use it correctly. And that can have everything from an impact on your clients, sometimes a deadly one, to an environmental impact where we overharvest things. So we have an obligation to understand the herbal history of anything that we are making use of. I believe that we have an obligation to seek consent. It is common, I've witnessed, for herbalists who are just getting started to start making all kinds of things for all kinds of people. They learn all these amazing effects that herbs can have on the body. They learn all these tips and tricks and wonderful recipes, and they immediately want to start helping everyone around them, genuinely wanting to assist. It often comes from a very good place in their spirit. They want to heal, they want to help. However, because so many herbal medications are under-researched, and because so much history has been suppressed and so much history has been lost, the potential that some herbal medicines have for harm is sometimes unknown. And this has a direct impact upon the informed consent process. When a physician is unable to provide evidence about efficacy or the potential for side effects, they can't make use of a medication. But when an herbalist can't provide that information, they oftentimes go right ahead. That's one issue. But even in cases where they have researched and learned about side effects and drug interactions, they don't always thoroughly inform their clients of such. And sometimes a beginner herbalist may actually give someone something without informing them that it is medicine at all, that it is pharmacologically active, that it will have effects on the system of their bodies. They haven't inquired what other medications someone is on. They haven't investigated what effects that this might have on a person's medical conditions, or maybe they don't even know all of the medical conditions that someone has before giving them something without informed consent. So beyond the issue of sometimes you can't get fully informed consent because we don't fully understand how an herb works or what all the effects are upon someone, even in cases where they can get some degree of informed consent, they aren't always. And I believe that we should be. We should be getting as much informed consent as we can. And that informed consent comes with an obligation of understanding when you shouldn't make use of something. The next ethical obligation that I want to discuss is that of care. I believe that care is demonstrated through concern for the welfare of those who make use of the advice or guidance or products created by an herbalist, as well as care for the communities and environments affected by the work of an herbalist. For an herbal medicine practitioner, care requires not only knowledge and expertise, as we've discussed, but also the ability to make judgments about when an herbalist should act and when they should not, about what is appropriate care, about what is safe care. This involves, an understanding not to act from incomplete or inaccurate or outdated information, which of course is part of that lifelong learning we've already discussed. This of course involves, as we've already discussed, staying well informed about new developments, new research, new safety information. But care is also shown when we refuse to act outside of the bounds of our known competence. Care is also shown by making sure that our products come from trusted suppliers, that we're not using herbs that might be adulterated or mixed with something that we can't identify, and that we are sourcing from ethical companies. Care can also be demonstrated in how we communicate with our clients, that we are not doing so in a disrespectful fashion, that we are acting in an inclusive fashion, that we are caring for all of our community and not just the community that looks like us or is from the same socioeconomic background as us. It is also important that we provide care in an accessible way, that we make sure that we're not, for example, writing out all of our instructions for someone who can't read, that we are not providing written dosage information with someone with dyscalculia, that we are making sure that someone can receive care from us in a way that works for them. This also can involve making sure that the products we're using are not outdated, that they're not rotten, that they're not dried out to the point of it being unusable. There is so much to the obligation of care, but really it means that we need to be invested in the well-being of our clients, that we need to have some degree of empathy, compassion, and understanding, and that we act as though our clients and the communities of our clients matter to us. Additionally, I feel as though herbal practitioners and herbalists have an obligation of respect. Respect sometimes means respecting someone regardless of their gender or their outward presentation, whether they're masc presenting or femme presenting. Sometimes it means respecting someone's pronouns. Sometimes it means respecting someone regardless of their sexuality. But additionally, it means respecting the customs and traditions of another culture. Not turning someone away, for example, because they wear a headscarf. Not demanding that they take their headscarf off, which is an extreme example, but still. Additionally, it means respecting their decisions. If someone doesn't make the decision that you want them to, you as the herbalist don't have the right to try and force them to make a different decision, the one that you want them to. Additionally, it means respecting cultural barriers. In some cases, herbs come from closed cultures. They have cultural and or spiritual significance to entire communities that may not be obvious to an outsider, to someone who doesn't belong to that culture. So sometimes you have to say, hey, as much as this is a useful herbal medicine, it isn't for me to make use of. Additionally, I believe that we have an obligation to be honest with our clients. Sometimes that honesty means simply don't deliberately lie, because that is obviously part of informed consent. Don't conceal information. However, that also involves being open and honest about what kind of evidence there is that an herbal treatment is effective. Is there any, or is there not? Not concealing any kind of gap in research or accessible information. Honesty should also be made use of when you are promoting your services. You shouldn't be claiming to have experience you don't have. You shouldn't be claiming to have knowledge you don't have. You shouldn't be claiming to have worked anywhere you didn't work or studied anywhere that you didn't study. Additionally, it would be extremely unethical to lie and say that an herbal medicine can cure any kind of medical condition. We don't make up lies about how much of a benefit an herbal medicine can provide. That would be extremely unethical. We also have an ethical obligation for fairness. Fairness can be complex. I would say equity is the best way to approach this. That we need to be equitable in the services that we provide. This not only includes fairness in that, for example, a person who is socioeconomically challenged should not be provided a different standard of treatment as someone who is wealthy. But additionally, that how you assist each client should be suited to their individualized needs. Fairness and equity also means making sure, again, that everything that you provide is in some way accessible to people, regardless of whether they are neurodivergent, regardless of whether they are disabled. The services of herbalists and street medics and other sort of adjacent fields are exceedingly popular in areas where American healthcare in particular is sometimes economically out of reach. I hate that we don't have socialized medicine in the United States. And it's awful to me that people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged often have no choice but to go to an herbalist for help that sometimes legally we can't provide, which is an ethical quandary for another day, and part of why I said this wasn't comprehensive. But it is so that people will often turn to an herbalist for accessible assistance. And this is where, in particular, fairness comes into play, where if our services are only for the wealthy, we are not being fair and we are not being equitable. Along with, of course, don't discriminate. Which leads me to our next one. I think that we have an ethical obligation not to discriminate, just like any other. We're not medical professionals, and we have an ethical obligation to understand that we're not medical professionals. But just as there is a standard not to discriminate if you were, for example, an employer, I also think that we should not discriminate based on, as I've said, socioeconomic status, ability, whether someone is disabled or not, whether someone is neurodivergent or not, whether someone is of any race or ethnicity, culture or creed, religion, what gender they are, what sexuality they are. I think we have an ethical obligation not to discriminate. Additionally, we have an ethical obligation of accountability. If we have made a mistake, we need to be accountable for it. We don't necessarily have the same kind of boards as, say, a medical professional has, but we should be accountable to our clients. If we have made a mistake, we have the obligation to inform them that we have made a mistake. If we have learned better about something we are providing for them, then we need to say so. We need to contact them and say, hey, as I've kept to my ongoing education, I have understood that something I've been providing you may be harming you, and you need to stop taking it. Additionally, I believe that we have an ethical obligation to consider environmental impact. Aside from impacts upon the communities, the production and delivery of any kind of herbal product can have an impact on the local environment. As herbal medicine grows in popularity, so does the demand upon certain species grow. Sometimes that demand literally endangers those species. A demand-oriented market and poor checks to make sure that there isn't over-harvesting as plants go into mass production can lead to devastating consequences for some species. It is the responsibility of all herbalists, of all herbal practitioners, to have some awareness of the geographical and cultural origins of the herbs used in their practice. Herbalists should not utilize herbs or herbal products that are derived from any species known to be threatened or endangered. It is the duty of all herbalists to remain cognizant about those herbs that are endangered and threatened, and to adopt appropriate practices in the harvest and use of those herbs. Herbalists also have a responsibility to train the next generation of herbalists not to promote the use of herbs whose survival is threatened or endangered. Be responsible and keep informed about that. It's further complicated by the fact that wildcrafting has increased in popularity, and now wildcrafted herbs are often seen as superior to those that are cultivated, endangering wild populations as people collect in an unsustainable manner. Unsustainable wildcrafting and harvesting threatens the survival not only of the plant species, but also of all species that are dependent on that plant in the environment it is from. I also believe that we have an ethical obligation not to sexually harass or abuse our clients, which I always feel like I shouldn't have to say, but it is an ethical obligation. That if someone is coming to you for any kind of assistance as an herbal professional, you don't have the right to make them feel sexually uncomfortable, to put sexual pressure on them. I understand that many herbalists assist their family, which also includes their spouse, in which case I would say, please don't sexually harass or abuse your spouse either. But I do understand that the relationship between you and your partner or partners is different than your relationship between you and your clients. However, that being said, I do think that you need to be sure not to flirt with or sexually pressure or abuse a client. I think it is the ethical obligation to have professional connections that can review your work, that you have people who are also capable of assessing what you are teaching or how you are practicing, and who are able to call you out on your presenting of inaccurate information or claiming to have a higher degree of knowledge or expertise than you have, that you foster those professional connections, and that you essentially peer review each other, since there isn't necessarily the same peer review system for herbalism publication as there is for allopathic medicine publication. I think that we have an ethical obligation to confidentiality. We should not be bandying about the private information of our clients. We should not be sharing what is going on with them with anyone. Our notes should be kept in such a fashion that they are either private and not accessible to our students or our co-workers, or they should be kept in some way encoded to ensure privacy. You can assign numbers, etc. You definitely should not be gossiping about your clients. That would be exceedingly inappropriate. I think that we have an obligation to refer out. If someone is beyond our services, especially, if they need medical assistance that we cannot provide, but additionally, if someone needs psychological assistance that we cannot provide, if someone needs massage therapy, if someone needs to be seeing a gynecologist, which falls under the category of medical assistance. But really, what an herbalist can provide is very limited to a certain particular field, but that doesn't stop people from coming to us for all manner of issues, and we have an obligation to refer outwards. Sometimes that extends far beyond what most herbalists think of, into issues of domestic or intimate partner violence, where you need to be referring someone to, say, Safe Nest or a similar organization. Or if someone comes to you and needs to be referred to a homeless shelter, all herbalists should keep a referral list with naturopathic physicians, allopathic physicians, other herbalists in case you can't assist a client or you're not a good match for that client, birth professionals, and sometimes, maybe even consider having a suicide hotline on there. And be willing to provide that list when necessary. You have an obligation of quality, or at least I believe that you do. I believe that herbalists should be making use of quality ingredients, but also be providing quality assistance. I think that we should not be giving people anything that is lower quality than we advertise, which falls under honesty, but also that we should be trying to provide the best product we can afford to provide for what we are charging. Additionally, I believe that we have an obligation to avoid needless services. I understand that herbalists often don't make a lot of money, but I don't believe it is ever appropriate to come up with extra services that someone might need from you in order to try and supplement your income. Be honest about when someone is done with a course of herbal treatment, and be upfront about what services they could need from you or not need from you, and don't tack on extras as a means of padding your own pocket. I believe that we have an obligation to seek help when necessary. If ever a client responds to anything that you have provided for them with some kind of allergic reaction, medicine interaction, sudden changes in blood pressure or heart rate, sudden uterine contractions, basically anything frightening, contact emergency services, poison control, seek a quick care, seek an emergency room. Do not disregard symptoms of something potentially dangerous for any reason, up to and including if you were helping a client ingest an entheogen. Always prioritize someone's life and always be upfront and honest with a medical professional as to what someone has ingested or injected or bathed in or whatever. You have an obligation to seek medical assistance when necessary. And lastly, which may seem as though it contradicts with confidentiality, but I do not believe it does. I do think that we have the obligation to seek interference if someone has said that they intend to harm themselves or to harm others. I think that we should consider ourselves to be mandatory reporters of something like child abuse. I'm aware that there is nothing that legally obligates us to be, but that does not mean that I think that we can eschew our ethical responsibility to consider ourselves mandatory reporters. All right, that's the ethical obligations of being an herbalist. You can argue with me, many people have, but those are the ones that I consider mandatory. All right. Thank you for joining us for this class today. I hope all of you are well and be safe out there.